love my dog as much as I love you. You may fade, my dog will always come through. All he asks of me is the food to give him strength. All that he needs is love, and that he knows he'll get. 'Cause I love my dog as much as I love you. You may fade, my dog will always come through. All the pain that I need comes shining through his eyes. I don't need no cold water to make me realize that I love my dog as much as I love you. You may fade, my dog will always come through. The whole Nina section of Fullmetal Alchemist is one of the most disturbing parts in any version of the story. It's probably because of this that when people think Fullmetal Alchemist, they are often reminded of this part of the story. On top of that, it encapsulates so much of what makes this story great. The sense of loss it portrays, how quickly something good can turn into something bad, and how sometimes there's no way to take back what's been lost. All three versions of these events, though they may differ from show to a certain degree, go through the same three important story beats. First, Ed and Al learn of the Chimera Sho Tucker previously created. Second, they befriend Nina. And third, they find out the truth about Sho Tucker's creations, which is of course that he uses human transmutation to create chimeras who can speak the human language. Let's dive deeper into the manga's take on this first. This is one of the first moments in the manga where we get to see Ed and Al truly loosen up and act like the children they are for any extended period of time. Nina, of course, is the one who brings this side of them out again, and reminds them of how much they miss this part of themselves. Though they should be focused on their studies, they are consistently distracted by Nina and Alexander, and neither of them seem to mind much. Their childish love for Nina, which becomes a sort of brother-sister dynamic, defines many aspects of their characters. See, they can relate to Nina. Their father was always busy just like Nina's, and they want to help her alleviate some of the loneliness she feels. Additionally, she too has lost her mother, though the way she's lost her is that she's moved away, or at least that's what her father tells her. Either way though, her mother not being there helps Ed and Al connect with her on a level that goes beyond two kids just caring for another kid. There's a personal dynamic here, despite the short amount of time they spend together. Another thing we see is how harsh the government can be, though in this case, unlike in the mining town, that harshness is not without a logic and utility that could promote public wellness. After all, if the government is funding alchemists who don't get them results, then what's the point in continuing to provide them with funding? So if there are no results, then no more funding. That's that. Brotherhood does a good job of adapting this first section of the chapter, where Ed and Al's relationship with Nina develops. While few big changes are made, a lot of things are done that add to these events. For example, the music in this scene when Ed and Al are playing with Nina suits it really well, with a recorder playing in a high, childish register that, to me, is distinctly nostalgic in tone. Also, while I often don't enjoy Brotherhood's use of audio and visual gags all that much, they feel right at home here, and exist to make the lighthearted tone of this section more extreme so that, when it all comes crashing down, it's even more powerful. A more major addition, however, is Scar's battle with the Ironblood alchemist at the beginning of this episode. Of course, the idea here is to establish Scar as a powerful force, as he's going to come back at the end of the episode and, well, you know. This also accentuates a big difference between the manga's Brotherhood's and 2003's take on Scar. In Brotherhood, Scar is the most powerful out of all three versions, at least in terms of his introduction. Meanwhile, in 2003, he's more subdued and is treated in a way that makes him almost feel like a lost child at times. He's confused, and though he's physically powerful, we don't get the sense that his power will necessarily become action. It's important to note that I don't think either of these takes on Scar is better or worse. They are simply different and worth bringing up. As far as this section of the story is concerned, 2003 makes many more changes on top of that though. First, due to the ordering of events, Mustang doesn't seem to have as much genuine concern for the brothers as he has in the manga or Brotherhood. After all, in 2003, they are at Sho Tucker's to study for the alchemist exam. Of course, they need to pass so that Mustang will look good to the higher-ups in the military. So here, Mustang's choice to take the boys to Sho Tucker's place may be helpful, but he's also driven by a selfish motive. Meanwhile, in the manga and Brotherhood, he's only doing this because he can and because he feels like helping the boys in their quest to get their bodies back. Since Ed already has his state alchemist certification, there isn't much of an obvious ulterior motive for Mustang bringing him here. This is just one of those things in the manga and Brotherhood that make him a little bit more likable than he is in 2003. That's not to say that either take is better though. This is another one of those cases where it's just different. Additionally, while all three versions give hints that there's something off about Sho Tucker, 2003 gives so many hints that they cease to be hints. 2003 isn't just cluing the audience into the fact that Sho Tucker might be bad. 2003 is pretty much outright saying it. This is a massive change, where the shock and terror in the manga and Brotherhood comes from the suddenness of this whole thing. From things being okay one moment and then bad the next, 2003 has a build-up to this. In this case, the horror comes from waiting for something to go wrong, from anticipating that something just isn't right. And just as Ed finds more clues that something is wrong, we grow more and more certain that this is all going to go bad. And though 2003 is obvious about this, it has some engaging ways of putting it on display. In particular, I love this moment where we see Nina, Alexander, and Al playing outside. Then we see Sho Tucker standing alone and he says one word, Nina. We then cut to the same words we hear at the beginning of so many of 2003's episodes. Man cannot obtain anything without first sacrificing something. The meaning here is pretty clear, but still very powerful. Using a common part of each episode, using a pattern the audience has grown accustomed to communicate Tucker's thoughts to the viewer is impressively creative. Another moment like this occurs here, when we see a book full of information about alchemy, then a fire, then Nina and Alexander cuddling, and then Sho Tucker. In this way, alchemy becomes destruction, destruction combines with Nina and Alexander, and Sho Tucker is the one who will do it. And yet another instance of this sort appears when Nina draws a picture of her family together, and then that picture comes back when Ed finds that it has been burnt. This once again takes us back to the opening images of many of these episodes, making it a deeply personal moment for Ed and for us too. In fact, it's this burnt picture that prompts Ed to go and research the talking chimera Sho Tucker created. There are also these little moments where we see more of how Al has to go through these awkward maneuvers to hide what he is, through things like Nina demanding that he eat potatoes. Though this stuff goes by quickly, it adds a bit more depth to our understanding of Al's situation. Similarly, Ed's distressed look really makes it clear how much these things hurt him, too. After this, Ed and Al are taken to Hughes's place for Ed's birthday celebration, which also becomes Hughes's daughter's birthday when she is born that day. First off, this serves as a way to build on the father-son connection between Hughes and Ed by connecting Hughes's daughter with Ed. Second, showing Hughes here creates a clear contrast between him and Sho Tucker, and this contrast makes Sho Tucker's actions even more repulsive, in my opinion. And where Hughes is warm and understanding, Sho Tucker is controlling in 2003. Here, he deduces that Ed has attempted human transmutation to bring his mother back to life. In the manga and Brotherhood, however, Ed volunteers this information to Sho Tucker as a sort of sacrifice, or equivalent exchange, so that he can see more of Sho Tucker's materials. Of course, this means that Ed is still overall in control, which in turn makes it even more disturbing when control is ripped away from him and it is too late for him to help Nina. But in 2003, that control is never there. The situation begins and ends being larger than he is, and it feels like there's nothing he can do. There are many more examples of this situation being outside of Ed's controller understanding. For example, almost as soon as Ed gets his state alchemist certification, he's pitted against individuals within the government. Here, that person is the Iron Blood alchemist, who knows what Sho Tucker is doing, but just lets it go on anyway. Sure, Ed may have worked hard to get this thing that will help him and Al, but now he's tied up in something he doesn't understand, in a situation that is simply beyond him. Of course, another example of this is how Ed and Al break into Sho Tucker's house in 2003, instead of returning without any sort of hassle like they do in the manga or Brotherhood. Overall, though there are a number of differences between how the manga, Brotherhood, and 2003 handle Nina's introduction and characterization, every version excels in its own right, creating a bond between Ed, Al, and Nina that most viewers will truly care about. Now that we've gone through Ed and Al's time at Sho Tucker's house, let's compare how 2003 and Brotherhood handle the actual reveal of what happens to Nina and Alexander. 2003's take on this is almost entirely silent, while Brotherhood has frightening and intense music in the background of nearly the whole scene. Some of the music here is used to accentuate the moment Ed comes to understand what has happened. While the intense music is by no means bad, I personally think the silence is far more powerful. It creates this sense of tension in 2003 that's hard to put into words, and that I find much more palpable than Brotherhood's. I think that tension also has to do with the atmosphere of 2003, with the dark, shrieking creatures trapped in their cages, the firelight casting shadows over the characters, the transmutation circles scrawled on the floor and walls. The coloring is so different too. It may just be the candlelight, but the yellow tint in the flickering makes it feel like this whole scene is on fire. And when the music does come in, it's far less extreme than Brotherhood's, though it's by no means lacking in intensity. Brotherhood, meanwhile, drains the color from this scene, creating a huge contrast between the bright palette of the previous scenes involving Nina and this reveal. It's also paced carefully, giving each moment of understanding and action on Ed's part the time to properly sink in with the audience. I love how detailed all these facial expressions are, how striking each shot is, just how dynamic this is. The only thing I've noticed that both anime remove from the manga is Al's moment of anger with Sho Tucker, where he tells Sho Tucker that if Sho keeps on talking, he'll be the one to snap. While it's by no means a huge deal, it's an aspect of Al's character that both 2003 and Brotherhood either de-emphasize or remove entirely. I wish that it was left intact. I like the little bit of complexity it adds to Al. Sure, he's usually the calm and controlled one, and really, he even still is here, but he does have this anger, and I like to see glimpses into that. However, beyond all this, in 2003, when Ed goes into this childish fit, because frankly, that's what it is, no matter how much I understand how he feels, and no matter how well that was communicated to us in this episode, and he flips the car that Nina's being taken away in, we see something different than the manga and Brotherhood. Because of this, Nina is able to run away, and she runs right to Scar, who kills her. In this case, the childish side of Ed's character that the show has so carefully accentuated up to this point. It's part of what leads to Nina's death. It's not the only thing, of course, and it's not like Ed's totally at fault here, but it's part of it, and that's just so sad, I guess. It's crushing to think that, in even some slight way, Ed is responsible for this, that he didn't notice all the hints of just how evil Sho Tucker is soon enough, that he got there too late, that he flipped the car. Even more is done to connect this moment with Ed's own personal failings, and I think that makes this all the more horrifying. On top of this, 2003 does even more to establish Nina as being like family to Ed and Al. After all, as a frequent commenter on my Fullmetal Alchemist videos named Rhonda previously pointed out, Ed's mother wanted a wreath of flowers when she was dying, and when Ed passes his exam, a wreath appears, and him and Nina look up at it. In this way, a familial connection between them is emphasized. Of course, the additional time they spend together also adds to this. For Ed and Al, this is another moment where alchemy radically reshapes their lives, and 2003 does a wonderful job of honing in on that fact. There is one small gripe I have with 2003 here though, and by small gripe I mean really small. I would have preferred if it didn't cut to the outro song at the end of the episode. I found it to be too much of a tonal shift from the disturbing end of the episode, even if special images were used here. Instead, in my mind, having Ed crying and then maybe he falls into silence and the credits roll over that silence, that would have been even more powerful. In the end though, I personally prefer 2003's version of the Nina reveal over Brotherhood's and the manga's. Its tone and aesthetic just suit my sensibilities better than the others, though I really appreciate how each version goes about telling this section of the story. Also, the extra time spent with Nina helps this moment hit just a bit harder. The manga and Brotherhood have pretty similar ways of handling the aftermath of Nina's death. Ed cries, stating that they couldn't even save a little girl. The way this statement comes up at the end of the story honestly makes this moment hit way harder for me upon re-experiencing the manga and Brotherhood than it did the first time through. After this, Ed has night terrors and he and Al discuss their feelings about the overall situation. Ed's night terrors serve to connect this incident with his own weaknesses and his mother in a more tangible way. It's moments like these that are necessary for it to be clear that, though Ed is an incredibly strong, resilient person, he is by no means invincible and is, in fact, traumatized by the horrific things that have happened in his life. It might be a small moment, but Brotherhood puts a bit more focus on Al's feelings here. Specifically, we see the rain through his eyes as he mentions that he can't feel the rain on his body anymore. For a moment, it puts us in his shoes and displays just how isolated he is from the rest of the world, However, as we'll see through Al's connection with animals, for example, Al is a character who places importance on a connection with life that is outside of him. I mean, he and Ed did learn about the whole concept of one is all is one, and it's something that they take seriously and that is central to many of the story's themes. Additionally, a drop of rain falls down Al's metal cheek, tracing the line of a tear. In one moment, the separation and connection with the outside world that defines so much of Al's suffering is thrust into the spotlight. Unfortunately, in 2003, Al's feelings aren't really focused on all that much here. Instead, he seems pretty much unfazed by this. He remains calm and collected, talking about how they need to keep thinking about the Philosopher's Stone, how they need to become stronger so that if anything like the Nina incident happens again, they can do something. Of course, Al says that he's upset about Nina, but I think it would have been nice to show just a bit more emotion from him. Even just a small moment like the one I mentioned from Brotherhood would have gone a long way. However, 2003 focuses on Ed's feelings. While this is just shown through his general appearance, the fact that he chooses to abandon his position as a state alchemist, even if only briefly, makes it clear just how strong of an effect this has had on him. On top of this, he does things like lash out at Al. This is something I've heard many people complain about. Some people feel that, in this moment, Ed acts too childishly. While I can understand why this might not be enjoyable to watch, to be frustrated with Ed as a character for acting in this manner is a bit strange to me. He's 12 years old, he spent more time with Nina here than he did in the manga or Brotherhood, and we've already had more of his childishness explored in this series up to this point. As far as I'm concerned, this is the logical route for the series to take, based on what we know about Ed so far, and based on how traumatic this experience would be. I love my dog as much as I love you. You may fade, my dog will always come through.